think about great RPG or role-playing games with amazing lore, it's almost impossible not to stumble upon something from BioWare in the early 2000s. Series like Knights of the Old Republic, Jade Empire, Dragon Age, and in my opinion, by far the most captivating of them all, Mass Effect. And that's because for the first time in gaming history during the first game's release, it felt like we finally had a huge sci-fi epic that wasn't based on an already popular movie property like Star Wars. An entire universe out there for us to discover with alien species, locales, and stories to tell. However, the real thing that sets Mass Effect apart from its contemporaries isn't the memorable characters or sprawling futuristic locations. Rather, it's the utterly enthralling world building and lore. So much so that there's a literal voice codex with hundreds of entries paragraphs long, all narrated by a silky smooth voice, and people love it. I struggle to think of many other games I can literally do nothing more than just sit and listen to made up stories about the world for hours, but Mass Effect is so fascinating at its core that you simply can never feel like you have learned enough. Everything, down to what people eat and how biotics work from a scientific standpoint, can be carefully studied and understood, along with thousands of years of history including political strife, galactic conquest, and ancient alien artifacts. And speaking of ancient aliens, they're one of my personal favorite things about the setting. This isn't a near future like Starfield composed of mostly humans. In Mass Effect, the Milky Way has been conquered due to a mysterious network of relays that has been discovered by a handful of hyper-intelligent species, most recent of which when we play the games are humans themselves. These relays allow faster than light travel across gargantuan distances in our galaxy, and at the center of it all is what is called the Citadel, a massive space station that is the heart of galactic trade and politics, where a council of other alien species sits that act as important leaders with their hands in all sorts of events across space. And in each of the original trilogy games, we get to visit different parts of this station, all with their own architecture and ways of life. But the most interesting part of each of these encounters is just getting to walk around and really understand the universe more. You can talk with aliens all over and learn about their people, beliefs, and histories. You can read data terminals full of the biggest events in the timeline of the world, or simply bask in the glory of this hulking station full of so much life you've never seen before. And this sense of wonder only gets greater as you explore more and more of the universe. You can fly between multiple solar systems full of stars and planets, and for each of them, you can once again look into the history of every planet and the people that live there, or scan them for materials to look for upgrades. The best planets, though, are those we actually get to land on and run missions. Places like Noveria, Vermeer, Palaven, Mars, Ilium, Thessia, or even Earth's very own moon. And each of these many worlds is home to either massive cities we get to explore outside the Citadel, or missions full of lore and world building that is top-notch. For example, in the first game, you get to visit a haunted planet called Pharos, with buildings that reach high into the sky well above the clouds that have been abandoned and left desolate after a mysterious creature called the Thorian has been discovered when a race of intelligent machines called the Geth attack. Innocent human beings are being turned into mindless husks, and amidst the chaos lies a creature millions of years old that has the power to mind control its hosts and have them do its bidding. On a completely different mission, on a snowy planet like Noveria, you stumble upon an ancient race of bugs called the Rachni that years ago almost spelled the end of the entire galaxy, but were defeated by the Krogan, who in their massive numbers threatened galactic peace, which prompted Solarian scientists and special operatives to create a genophage to make them all infertile. And it's a rich and engrossing history and intrigue like this that makes Mass Effect so special. It really does feel like a living, breathing universe with its own history and people to uncover. Not everything is in service to you as the player. The world is the main character. And because of that, it's so easy to get lost in just trying to understand it all. And it's also why Mass Effect is the only game series in history where I personally listened to and read everything, because the world building is just so outstanding that you literally can't help but want more, especially when all that lore plays a crucial role in the decisions we make. For instance, that genophage I mentioned can be cured in the third game depending on your decisions, or you can choose to let the Krogan species die sky because of how dangerous you've seen them be on their home planet of Tuchanka. Or even those small touches like deep dive explanations for how Mass Effect relays work, or how certain species survive on so little food, add so much to the overall experience because it all feels well thought out, well crafted, and real. And at the heart of it all is one of the greatest and most fascinating main stories in a game series of all time, where you slowly unravel that behind this beautiful galaxy is actually a cycle that has been taking place for millions of years, where an ancient machine race of massive ships called the Reapers are awakening from their slumber to rid the galaxy of all organic life over and over. You see, millions of years ago, an apex race called the Leviathans noticed that all of their predecessors had died after they created true artificial intelligence and synthetics, which eventually wiped them out. So the Leviathans created a machine called the Catalyst, meant to bridge the difference between organic life forms and robotic creatures. But with its infinite resources and ability to calculate future probabilities, the Catalyst concluded that organics and synthetics were always meant to be in conflict, and that left to their own devices, organics would overuse all resources in the Milky Way and cause its collapse entirely. So the Reapers were created to purge all organic life every 50,000 years, right as alien civilizations are starting to get hyper advanced. And after killing all intelligent life in the galaxy, the Reapers would leave the more primitive creatures to their own devices to go through the natural stages of evolution to become spacefaring races once again that eventually discover the Mass Effect relays, which lead to the Citadel and a scientific revolution. And I can't express just how amazing lore like this is. I'll never forget playing through the original trilogy for the first time as a kid growing up, and to this day there's not been anything else in sci-fi games, movies, or even books alike that captured me in quite the way that the original Mass Effect trilogy did, where quite literally everything in the game is so interesting. The cultures, the aliens, the main plot, the science and technology, the people you meet, and most of all, the world that takes you by its grasp and never lets go. Mass Effect is so special because it's a series that at its core finds meaning in deep and introspective lore, the kind that will have you sitting on your couch for hours doing nothing more than simply listening and reading to anything you can find. And on top of that, there are tons of different places to visit and explore that give life to the things you have read and listened to, and only add to what is without a doubt one of the most interesting sci-fi settings the gaming medium has ever seen, and one of my personal favorite settings in fiction, period. For those of you that don't know, Cyberpunk 2077 is my favorite game of all time, and a big part of that is the amazing and immersive world. But no game world like this can be so immersive without some awesome world building and lore. And that's because the story of Cyberpunk 2077 actually begins in the early 1800s, when the original dynasties and families that would eventually give rise to megacorporations hundreds of years later were born, including many notable giants like Arasaka. But 1989 was the actual year things really kicked into gear. Secretly, behind the backs of the United States government, the FBI, NSA, DEA, and CIA all banded together to form what they called the Gang of Four, and with their power and influence, started to run the US behind the backs of the president and legislative and executive branches. Now pulling the strings, the Gang of Four attacked South America in an all-out war due to their own interests. And because of all of the casualties and injuries, massive amounts of spending were put into cybernetics and drugs to help the veterans. Sadly though, this war, along with many other conflicts around the world, led to an all-out collapse of society. Colombian drug lords, pissed at the never-ending death, launched a small nuclear bomb at New York and killed thousands, which in conjunction with engagements across the world set the stock market into a complete freefall in 1994, wiping away a majority of humanity's wealth. In this now chaotic world in pure disarray, the biggest companies around the globe started to band together to help, which resulted in them only becoming more powerful and influential, the beginning of the mega corporations' rise to power. Natural disasters all over the world started to erupt around this time as well, with an earthquake putting a third of Los Angeles underwater and droughts in the Midwest leading to food shortages that starved millions. To top it all off too, in the early 2000s, a deadly plague broke out which threatened a majority of Earth's population, and with everything going downhill fast, drastic action had to be taken. The mega corporations once again stepped up and created new technologies like the net to try and make communication easier, but this only meant more and more power for those evil corpos. And with all of this newfound power, the organizations also began to amass huge personal armies, which then cascaded into all-out corpo wars that led to even more devastation across the world. Gangs which had already formed in almost every major city became more and more powerful, and the Earth as we know it was on the verge of complete and utter annihilation. But as they always had, the corpos managed to gather even more influence by promising salvation. And essentially, this process of mega corporations becoming more powerful continued over and over through multiple wars and even space battles, and eventually resulted in the setting we've come to know from the game itself, where we play as V in Night City in California. And it's in the game we get to explore so many different awesome ideas like cyberpsychosis or cybernetic implants that cause people to go crazy, along with the evolution of the net and the black wall specifically, which serves as a protective barrier to the net to keep out rogue AI that might even be working with extraterrestrial beings that are helping them take over the universe. It's just such an insane backstory for the whole game, but along with that comes so many deep explanations and displays of how this future fantasy of humanity would live, with an over-reliance on technology and a loss of connection to our own bodies being key. Even places like brothels in this dystopian future are actually staffed by humans with chips in their head called dolls, who simply fulfill your every fantasy only for the chip in their brain to wipe their memory and for them to do it over and over again, like being trapped in a nightmare that you never even knew you experienced. It's a world with so many dark and twisted themes like this, but also at its core, one that didn't forget about all of the humanity we have beneath those layers of electronics and wires in our heads, where people still at their core have a fire and love in their soul to save the little bit of humanity we all have left. Few series are as pervasive and far-reaching as The Elder Scrolls from Bethesda. Taking place over 5 mainline series games now, with a 6th on the way, along with many smaller spin-offs, the world of Tamriel has played host to countless memorable quests and storylines. But throughout each of the games that include a variety of combat, stories, and races to play, there may be no better feature than the series' seemingly unending and utterly fascinating lore. So much so that sitting down and listening to hours of deep dives into quests and theories about the games can oftentimes be even more fun than actually playing the games themselves, and that's because from the ground up, Elder Scrolls was built to capture our imaginations. The continent we play on, Tamriel, is a small part of a much bigger planet called Nirn, which itself is part of the mortal plane known as Mundus. Across Nirn lies many other continents we have never explored, like Akavir to the east, which is home to giant serpent and lion men who wage war and trade, and to the west across the vast sea lies Yokuda, original home of the Red Guards and Sinestral Elves, who are characterized by their flashy outfits and gold they don. But each of these regions is completely shrouded in mystery, with only small tidbits of lore and history we can pick up from the games, from books we read, and people we talk to. For example, it was said that the Sinestral Elves in Yokuda had unlocked the power of time itself, and built many great cities covered in gold that stretched across the sands of this desolate land. The things they managed to build and design would have dwarfed anything we've ever found in Tamriel itself. And speaking of Tamriel, at one point, the king of the continent waged war with the inhabitants of Akavir, but was swiftly defeated, and now we only hear tales of what they saw. To the north lies an icy tundra which gave birth to the Nords, who eventually invaded Skyrim and enslaved the Snow Elves, forcing them to create a pact with the Dwemer to live in captivity deep beneath the surface in underground cities, slowly being turned into blind, flesh-eating monsters we fight in Skyrim called the Falmer. And really, all of these small stories and mysteries are what make the Elder Scrolls series so fascinating in the first place, with countless different races to play like lizard or feline humans, or dark and sinister magic-wielding elves. And the lore only goes deeper and deeper the more you step into it. For example, many millennia ago, there were 2 planes of existence, Aetherius, or the immortal realm home to the 9 divine and Aedra, and Oblivion, home to the Daedra and Great Princes. Both of these realms resided in the larger universe known as Arbis, which itself was composed of the divine realms and an all-powerful and unknown void. At one point, a spirit residing in the realms named Lorcan tricked many of the other spirits and was able to craft the mortal realm of Mundus, which the Aedra aligned with and the Daedra opposed. This resulted in Lorcan being killed and his heart ripped from his body, with his followers fleeing to this newly created realm of Mundus, and with them tearing a rip between the fabric of divine and human at the same time, creating the suns and stars, which are also the source of magic in the mortal realm. And from then on, the world of Elder Scrolls began to form, with the divines mating and intermingling with the mortal beings on Nirn. Like I mentioned before, we have only played on and experienced the continent of Tamriel, but even within this landmass lie so many different zones of influence, like the Black Marsh and elsewhere, home of the beast races, and the rest of Tamriel, which has been conquered by human and elvish races known as Man and Mer. And for thousands of years now, there's been non-stop political strife, religious tensions, interference from gods, and all sorts of crazy and insane theories taking place. For instance, in the swampy lands of the Black Marsh, many texts state that the Argonian race we can play as in the games is actually a descendant of non-intelligent reptilian creatures who, after eating the sap from talking trees known as the Hist, were transformed into their slaves who were being sent forth onto other parts of Tamriel to eventually gain full control of the continent, essentially acting as sleeper agents waiting for their moment. Or what about the Dwemer, who are an ancient race of dwarf-like people who built great cities underground using tonal architecture, which can quite literally bend the fabric of space-time within Arbis itself, allowing machines to come to life, great wonders to be built, or by some accounts, time travel, which could be why this powerful race was said to suddenly vanish in the blink of an eye many years before we play, and something we see the remnants of in Morrowind. Regardless though, there's just so much awesome lore to dig into in this series, and within each region lies so many fascinating stories that give more life to this breathtaking world. There's a reason games like Skyrim, Oblivion, and Morrowind have such a die-hard fan base, and a big part of that is because of the world that they're all built atop of, and how many endlessly cool things there are to learn about it. Fallout is home to some of the most amazing and fascinating little tidbits of world building and lore that the games medium has seen, and in many ways, it's the main contributing factor behind the success of this now juggernaut of a franchise. From its most basic standpoint though, Fallout is based on an alternative timeline to our real world where up until the 1950s, things were pretty much exactly the same. But in the Fallout universe, humanity largely stayed stuck and attached to these atomic age ideals of the time. And because of this, much of the technological, aesthetic, and cultural growth over the following century remained draped in nostalgic perversion for this now long gone era. But during this time too, with the advent of the nuclear bomb and growing arsenals around the world, along with rising tensions between the United States of America and China, not all was looking good. In fact, by the year 2077, animosity between these two nations had reached a fever pitch, and resulted in the infamous Great War, which began on October 23rd of that year. Both China and the US launched almost their entire arsenal of nuclear weapons at each other at once, and in the crossfire, countless other nations and lives were lost across the world. And for anyone that was unlucky enough to have survived the initial blast, the nuclear fallout would have blackened the sky above and caused extreme cold and despair, along with mutating animal and human DNA alike into strange and otherworldly creatures. And even hundreds of years later, the now almost unrecognizable Earth, now known as the Wasteland, would be home to copious amounts of murder and evil, a quite literal hell on Earth for those of us still alive. However, maybe the most interesting part about the whole series isn't actually the bombs falling, but all the implications around it. And that's because before the Great War began, a mega corporation known as Vault-Tec, secretly in cahoots with the United States government, had set up 122 underground vault facilities facilities that were meant to house and protect innocent civilians in the event that the bombs did fall. On the surface, these vaults were marked as safe houses in the event of catastrophe that simply served as shelters for food, water, and housing, along with a lot of community, all of which could be maintained for hundreds of years post the bombs falling. But behind this facade lied a much darker secret, because the vaults were actually being used as a set of testing facilities on human experimentation and torture. And in the first season of the Fallout TV show, it was even revealed that Vault Tech themselves intended to drop the bombs first at the start of the Great War. That way they could force innocent people into the vaults to run experiments on them for their own sick pleasure, and also the promise of a monopoly over the world and its people hundreds of years later. And some of these experiments were truly heinous, like pumping white noise or toxic gases into these vaults where no one could escape, murdering mothers and fathers, and then using their children as lab rats in genetic mutation, only to kill off those not physically or mentally strong enough in front of other children. Or even trapping residents inside virtual reality simulators, where the overseer or leader of the vault could kill them over and over again, only to wipe their memories and start all over. The strange and dark things that happened in these vaults are truly unimaginable, but also some of the most oddly fascinating stories to dive into. And without a doubt, they're what make the lore of Fallout so recognizable and ubiquitous. So much so that I actually even made a 2-hour-long video going in depth into every single vault we know about, so feel free to check that out too if you're interested. And overall, these vaults played a key role in every game, as they serve not only as the starting place, but also locations to find endless lore and intrigue to dive into in this series. And on top of this, there's so much more other lore in this series as well that takes it to the next level, like the Brotherhood of Steel, who are a splinter faction of the old United States military that has formed into a techno-fascist regime of sorts that scours the states looking for pre-war technology that they can hoard for themselves. Or what about the Enclave, the remnants of the highest levels of the government who are now shrouded in secrecy, but may even have been the key people that started the Great War, all in a bid to escape from Earth on a massive spaceship and find a new home planet after they knew the world was doomed from upcoming nuclear annihilation. Some of the older lore revealed from the original creators of the series even paint some potential pictures where the Enclave themselves may have been behind the vaults, and the reason the experiment seems so random and over the top is because all of these experiments were being done to help with deep space exploration for elites who knew the world would end. And just when you thought it couldn't get any crazier, there are even other problems in the wasteland years after the devastation, like the proliferation of FEV, or the forced evolutionary virus, which was created in lab testing trying to develop human resistances to Chinese synthetic contagions, which resulted in a virus that can literally change human DNA and mutate us into giant horrific monsters that eat human flesh and shout obscenities. Overall, Fallout is as insane and depressing as it is wacky and whimsical, and the endless gore and killing in conjunction with the happy robots and 50s era charm results in a world that is unlike anything else out there, with some of the coolest and deepest lore you can find.